31.4 points per game, 50 points in back-to-back games, a Most Valuable Player award in an overseas league. And the most remarkable part of that resume is not what is on it, it is what it has not produced. 12 WNBA teams, 0 phone calls. That is where Chennedy Carter is right now, winning MVP hardware on another continent, while every single franchise in the most talked-about women's basketball league on earth has arrived at the exact same quiet conclusion about her. And that conclusion did not drop out of nowhere. It came from a specific incident, a specific pattern, and a specific podcast appearance that just made everything worse. She did not break her silence to announce a comeback. Carter broke her silence to say that Angel Reese told her to foul Caitlin Clark, and she chose to deliver that claim on a Chaos Streamers platform, not ESPN, not The Athletic, not a journalistic outlet with any real accountability infrastructure, but a content creator whose entire brand is built on viral controversy and crowd energy. That platform choice is not an accident. It is a strategic calculation. And when you understand what the calculation was designed to accomplish, the whole picture of where Carter's career actually stands becomes a lot clearer. Many of you have been sitting with questions about this situation for over a year. What really happened inside that Chicago Sky locker room? Why has a proven scorer with legitimate first-round talent been effectively shut out by an entire professional league? And what is Carter's decision to blame her former teammate on a streamer's show 14 months after the fact tell us about where this whole situation is actually headed? We are going to work through every one of those questions today. If the depth of investigation we bring to these stories is what keeps you coming back, hit that like button right now. It helps the algorithm surface this content to people who are actually looking for the full picture, not just the headline. Before you can understand what Carter said on that podcast, you need the structural context, because the physical altercation with Caitlin Clark was not a spontaneous, isolated moment of aggression. It was the end product of a Chicago Sky organization that had been deteriorating from the inside for an entire season, and arguably longer than that. When GM Jeff Pagliuca dismissed head coach Teresa Weatherspoon following the 2024 season, he did not deliver the standard vague press conference language about going in a new direction. He was unusually specific. League sources confirmed that Weatherspoon's coaching environment had, in the words of those same sources, catered to the needs of specific players, not to building a competitive basketball team. That is a general manager essentially putting on record that institutional accountability inside that program had stopped functioning, that the people running the locker room had, over time, oriented the entire operation around keeping certain individuals comfortable rather than pursuing wins. The on-court numbers reflect that failure precisely. Chicago finished the 2024 season at 13 wins and 27 losses, near the bottom of the entire WNBA. But embedded inside that losing record was a statistical pattern that sources inside the league described in very specific language. The offense was deliberately structured to manufacture what they called, directly, stat padding for Angel Reese. The specific example that emerged was the sky-running post offense to get Reese to double-double milestones against opposing bench units, while already trailing by more than 20 points in games that had long since been decided. The organizational objective was not winning the basketball game. It was getting a specific player to a specific statistical threshold. This is essential context for the Carter conversation. Carter was the team's leading scorer in that environment, 17.5 points per game, a first-round pick with legitimate offensive ability. Operating inside a system that was not designed for competitive success, watching the offense be restructured around manufacturing someone else's numbers with zero institutional intervention. That does not excuse the physical altercation with Clark. Nothing does. But it explains the specific kind of dysfunction that made a moment like that possible. And it explains why multiple players across that roster were, according to league sources, genuinely and deeply unhappy with the culture Weatherspoon had allowed to develop. Critically, Carter's conduct issues were going completely unchecked. Nobody was drawing lines. Nobody was establishing consequences. The behavioral patterns that would eventually produce the most high-profile moment of her career were allowed to accumulate without correction. So you had a losing team, a coaching staff that had restructured the offense around one player's statistics, a leading scorer whose conduct was going unaddressed, and a locker room full of players watching all of it build in real time. The fracture became public in a way that is almost difficult to believe a management team simply allowed to happen. Carter posted a tweet about layup efficiency, specifically how the ability to consistently make layups puts players in a different tier. No name attached, none needed. Everyone watching understood the target. Reese responded with, "What's understood don't need to be explained." Two active teammates publicly exchanging shots on social media during an ongoing season. Management said nothing, no statement, no mediation, no visible attempt to contain it. It simply played out in front of the entire WNBA world, which tells you that by this point, the institutional structure inside that organization was already completely broken. Marina Mabrey's exit from Chicago provides the most revealing outside confirmation available. After being traded to the Connecticut Sun, Mabrey said almost immediately that she was thrilled to be on a team capable of competing for a championship. Then she went further, describing Connecticut's culture as one defined by discipline and professionalism, where experienced veterans hold players accountable and actively protect the competitive environment. She said all of this without mentioning Chicago's name once. She did not need to, because what she described as Connecticut's defining strengths was a point-by-point inversion of everything she had just left. Mabrey was inside that locker room. She saw the favoritism. She watched the gap between what the coaching staff prioritized and what the team actually needed. And the moment she had an exit, her first public statements described her new team in language that read like a clinical diagnosis of her old one. That organizational collapse, the coaching dysfunction, the unchecked conduct, the public locker room fractures, the culture of catering to individual statistics over team performance is the soil the June 2024 incident grew from. And it is the backdrop against which Chennedy Carter is now trying to rewrite the narrative by pointing at her former teammate. Before we get into what Carter specifically said and the very real strategic problem with her Reese narrative, drop your read in the comments right now. Do you think any WNBA team eventually gives Carter a roster spot? Because the math on this situation is more complicated than most coverage is willing to admit, and we want to know where you stand before we lay out the full case. Now, about that podcast choice. Carter selected Neon's platform for her most significant public statement since the incident itself. Neon is not a sports journalist. He does not conduct accountability interviews. His audience is built on spectacle, viral energy, and high-momentum moments, and that platform is not going to press a guest for precise, verifiable answers when the energy is better served by letting the story escalate naturally. That is not a critique of what he does. It is simply a description of the environment Carter chose. And understanding that environment helps you understand what she was trying to accomplish. Maximum reach, minimum pressure. The account she gave goes like this. Before the play, she says she was elbowed. Then something was said to her. Then someone was yelling directly in her face. Then she hit a shot coming down the court, and that is when the hip check happened. What Carter constructed is a chain of escalating provocations. An elbow, verbal exchange, direct confrontation, emotional reaction, physical consequence. And she named Angel Reese as the central force behind that chain, not as someone who was also involved, as the person who drove the sequence. Let's be precise about what that argument actually claims, because it is more significant than it first sounds. Carter is not saying she lost her composure in an isolated moment. She is saying there was a coordinated escalation that her former teammate directed, that the aggression was architected, not spontaneous. That is a much more serious accusation than, "I snapped." If you take her account at face value, she is describing herself as the executor of a play that someone else called. "Reese made me do it" is not just deflection. It is an allegation of deliberate orchestration against her own former teammate. But here is the structural problem with that entire framing. Even if you accept every element of Carter's timeline as accurate, every elbow, every word, every moment of someone in her face, the responsibility for throwing a deliberate hip check at an off-ball player does not transfer to whoever was talking on the court. The league does not evaluate intent based on what a teammate may or may not have said. They evaluate what is on the film. And what is on the film is a flagrant foul delivered to a player who was nowhere near the play. 14 months of podcast appearances cannot reframe what is visible in the footage. The sequencing of Carter's public response compounds the problem significantly. In the locker room on the night it happened, when reporters asked about the incident, Carter's answer was, "I ain't answering no Caitlin Clark questions." Complete refusal. Total stonewalling at the exact moment accountability was being requested. And now, over a year later, with no WNBA roster and a situation that has quietly evolved from a suspension into a league-wide verdict, she is delivering a detailed multi-step account on a platform specifically designed to minimize scrutiny. The pattern, silence when it counted, explanation when it is safe, is the precise opposite of what the league wants to see from a player trying to demonstrate meaningful behavioral change. And there is something worth noting about what Reese's reputation absorbs here, regardless of how Carter's claim lands. Reese spent her rookie season navigating her own complicated relationship with public perception, the stat-padding narrative, the locker room tension that went public on social media, the departure of a teammate who described her new team as the opposite of everything she had just left. Now she is being named on a public platform as the person who ordered a flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark. That is a serious allegation with no corroboration, delivered by someone who was simultaneously tweeting shots at Reese during their shared season. Connecting those dots is something fans and analysts online are actively doing right now. If this level of analysis is what you come to this channel for, the angle's other coverage is not willing to go to, consider joining as a member. Your support is what makes it possible for us to keep running these investigations at this depth. Now let's talk about Caitlin Clark's response to the incident, because this contrast is the story underneath the entire story, and it deserves the attention it rarely gets. In the immediate aftermath, Clark made her free throws. She addressed it directly and briefly. "It is what it is. It's a physical game. Go make the free throw." No public campaign for a harsher suspension, no tweet, no podcast appearance, no performance of victimhood for sympathy. She just kept playing, kept competing, and let the results do everything she needed them to do. For someone who had every legitimate reason to amplify that moment, who was the most visible player in the sport and could have turned a flagrant foul into weeks of headlines in her favor, she made it smaller? That is not a PR calculation. That is character under pressure, and every franchise in the league was paying attention. If this breakdown is reshaping how you see what actually happened here, share this video with someone who still thinks this story is just about one play on one night, because what we're talking about is an entire league making a values decision in real time. The Indiana Fever's transformation under Clark provides the full commercial context for why the league's verdict on Carter is as final as it appears. The Fever drew over 600,000 fans in a single season. WNBA merchandise sales increased more than 500% compared to the year before Clark arrived in the league. Player jersey sales went up 1,000% across the board, not just Clark's, the entire league. Clark's own jersey was the top seller everywhere. And here is the piece most coverage is not examining closely enough. The league is actively using Clark's commercial visibility as leverage in the ongoing collective bargaining process, making the case to broadcast partners and sponsors that women's basketball's marketability has fundamentally and permanently shifted, which translates directly into better contract structures and higher compensation for every single player currently on a WNBA roster. The player whose former teammate just accused of orchestrating a flagrant foul is the player whose market value is being deployed to improve every other player's financial future. The pattern across Carter's 3 WNBA organizations deserves examination that goes beyond the Clark incident specifically. Atlanta, Los Angeles, Chicago, 3 different cities, 3 different front offices, 3 completely separate coaching staffs, 3 identical conclusions about the same player. The talent was clearly never the concern. 31 points per game on 51% shooting in an overseas MVP season settles that argument definitively. The behavioral and conduct concerns were consistent enough across 3 independent organizational evaluations that every new front office arrived at the same place without coordinating with the others. When a pattern is that uniform across an entire professional career, it stops being about any individual organization's culture or preferences and starts reflecting something persistent. What makes the league's current posture historically significant is the precision of the trade-off it represents. The WNBA effectively declined to roster a player whose overseas production would rank among the best scoring outputs in the entire league, and did so unanimously because of conduct concerns connected to the most commercially transformative moment in the league's history. That is not a routine personnel preference. That is the league making a structural declaration about what it values during the period of greatest visibility and opportunity it has ever experienced. When 12 franchises make the same call simultaneously, it becomes a precedent, and precedents define what comes next. The Fever are the model, not because they are winning, but because of the specific way they are winning and the specific people doing it. Aaliyah Boston openly describing how Clark's constant encouragement keeps her locked in and competitive even on the team's worst nights. Kelsey Mitchell operating in more space than she has ever had because defenders can't leave Clark open for a single possession. Lexi Hull executing the unsexy, invisible work that championship-caliber teams require without seeking recognition for any of it. This is the product of a locker room built deliberately around accountability and collective purpose. It is the direct structural opposite of what Teresa Weatherspoon allowed to develop in Chicago. And every front office in the league is watching it. Every interview Carter gives explaining a play from 14 months ago, every blame she assigns to someone else, every platform she chooses to avoid accountability, none of it changes the calculation. It refreshes the comparison. It makes the contrast between what she represents and what Clark and the Fever have built more visible, not less. And visibility, right now, is the most consequential currency in the entire sport. Here is the question nobody is fully asking yet. As the CBA negotiations continue and the Fever cement themselves as the unambiguous model franchise, what happens to the definition of a signable WNBA player? Because the standard is actively shifting. Talent has always been the price of entry, but the conversation happening in front offices across the league right now, whether you can see it or not, is about what kind of player, what kind of leader, and what kind of culture each franchise is willing to attach itself to. Carter's situation is the clearest available case study for how that calculation gets made, and how final the answer can be when 12 organizations reach the same conclusion at the same time. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We are tracking the CBA negotiations, the Fever's off-season decisions, and every development in this story as the 2025 season approaches. This chapter is nowhere near finished.